there, and she specializes in Prader-Willi syndrome. So I'll leave it at that. She'll be here to share all of her great expertise, and we're so happy she's here. So introducing Elizabeth Rue.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here, and you can obviously tell that I'm originally from the South because I have that accent. But we also have we have a parent training video that came out last year. IPSO actually funded for us to talk about some of the same teacher tips that we have. We actually now have one for parents. So if you go under, I think, PWS parenting, it'll come up as well. It has like specific ideas. It's some of the stuff that's in here. And a little bit more about me is I've worked with people with Prader-Willi syndrome since 1995. So 22 years, and my background was a teacher for several years in a private school. I have a degree in art, which is so very far from what I do now. But I did that, and I worked at a psych hospital for 4 years doing evaluations and therapy and just kind of the basic stuff there. And when somebody several years after when I was working there said, hey, we've got this research study where people have this rare genetic disorder, and read a little bit about it, but they're looking for somebody to direct this research study. And they've had several people who started and stayed about a month and said, thank you very much, but I'm not going to do this. So I remember reading stuff online going, wow, this sounds horrible, but I don't know, how bad could it be? I'm used to psych patients. And so I did that in 1995, and pretty much ever since then have been working pretty much exclusively with people with PWS. So I've evaluated about 300 people with PWS. Some of the people in this room have actually come down to Nashville and been part of our long longitudinal study, which ended last year. And we're now doing a social skills online training group for teens and adults with Prader-Willi syndrome, and it's completely online. We're actually teaching some social skills and some kind of coping skills about how to work well with others socially. And that's something we just started actually 3 weeks ago, and we're going to try to see 50 people through a grant through FPWR, so that when we get it all squared away, what we'd like to do is actually kind of copyright the curriculum and let people actually get it online with all the actual tapes and everything else, so they can actually do these interventions in schools, groups, things like that, so we can actually teach some of those skills. So that's some of the stuff we're doing now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about behavior now. Later this afternoon, I'm going to talk about adulthood specifically. And then in between that, I'm going to actually meet with some of the teens and adults here, and we're going to talk about some of the social skills thing. But I will say one thing, it's hard to teach them social skills unless we teach parents and other people who deal with them some of those things, because honestly, they're not the most insightful bunch. I mean, after we've done these for several weeks, it's funny to watch some of the comments they come up with, and they'll often tell me, well, Elizabeth, that's the stupidest thing. Well, thank you very much. Yes, it is, and we'll just keep on going from there. They have, a real idea of what is supposed to happen in the real world. So we're going to talk about some of the characteristics of PWS, and then we'll talk specifically about some of the behavioral techniques that work well. So I tell people, given this that we evaluate so many people, and I tell people, if you have little bitty kids, I only see kids as young as 4, so I don't know a ton about toddlers or things like that. It just seems to me that, people kind of grow into that 4 years, age as far as stubbornness, oppositional, kind of stuck on things, those kinds of things. And so everybody's different. Don't think that, it's like a checklist. My kid's doing all these things. It's an idea that it's a little bit like autism. It's kind of an actual spectrum. Some people have better social skills. Some people have more food problems. It's kind of a gamut. So we were just talking, Cheryl and I were talking about how people look and go, oh, that kid's skinny. I wish my kid looked like that. And that kid's talking so well. And this kid has no behavior problems. I mean, everybody has kind of a mixed bag. So the idea is we're going to touch specifically on some of the behavioral features, but I won't really focus on food because honestly, I tell people that's not something that a lot of people, you either can do it or you can't. And it's this idea that you lock it, you have access, you plan your life around them not having access to food. But the behavior issues are a lot more kind of problematic because as soon as you come here, and it's not the same thing as home, and it's not the same thing as school. And sure enough, your kid's crying in the hallway, and some people have to walk over them, and you're so embarrassed. And the nice thing about being here is everybody's had that happen, so you already kind of know this is what we have to deal with. And I do think generally the PWS groups that I see, they're an incredibly welcoming and non-judgmental group. So I tell people the idea is that it's nice to belong to a group where people know that your kid whining about something is not the end of the world. It's just like everybody else's kid. So we've been doing a longitudinal study for almost 13 years, and we said we were going to see about 166 people, children and adults, and we were trying to figure out when behaviors emerged, how they're related to age, gender, and genetic subtype. Normally when people call me, I'll say, how old is your kid? What's their genetic subtype? People are like, I don't know, he just has PWS. Genetic subtype is one thing that we'll talk a little bit about because there are definitely some differences between these two groups, and I think it's important to know. We've now evaluated 247 people, a lot more than we ever thought, and we've actually seen quite a few older adults, people in their 50s and 60s with PWS. And we're trying to figure out what behaviors we should focus on for possible change. We can't change everything. Certain things are really kind of like, trait-driven, some of the stubbornness, some of the stuckness, but we can find ways to kind of work around it, and we talk a lot with teachers and other professionals about how to deal with these people in all sorts of settings, including medical settings, educational settings, and therapy. So some of the we look a lot at psychiatric features. We do a really long psychiatric interview talking about all these kinds of things, and not everybody meets criteria here, but generalized anxiety disorder is something that a lot of people have. They get really stuck on things. They have to ask you 100 questions to be reassured about it, and even when you answer them, they're like, I don't really believe you, so I'm going to ask it all over again. You often feel that they just are anxious and uptight and they can't relax. Sometimes it can be incredibly intense. If they're having issues at school and things are not kind of on kilter or on schedule, they can become more intense and more anxious. And it can last for several hours a day. Most of the parents that we say the same, redirecting my kid about being anxious or worried or stuck on something is one of the hardest issues they deal with. And it affects school and home. Other people actually have obsessive compulsive disorder. Things have to be just right. You notice them like moving things. And it's not like living with the cleanest person ever. Trust me, they're not neat. They may have stacks and stacks of paper. It's like living in a hoarder's, biopic. And so a lot of them have to collect things and whatever, but they have a certain way that things should be, and a certain way that things should go. And if the world doesn't, somehow do that, they just absolutely fall apart. They just can't manage that. So we know that that's another issue. Repeating actions, arranging, ordering, hoarding. And again, most of them will say, I can't really tell you why I do it, I just have to do it that way. And what we often say is, if you don't let them do it, what happens? And parents go, oh, I don't ever do that. That sounds horrible, because they will fall apart. So, and again, it's not our kind of normal obsessive compulsive things. They're not counting things or walking around the car checking the tire pressure. It's weird things that just like they have to kind of have them a certain way. So these are the things that we talk about, and also things like ADHD and vocal and motor tics. So a lot of people will say, my kid stutters. I'm like, your kid is not stuttering. They are saying something over and over and over because it doesn't sound quite right. So they'll go, and it's not the same thing as stuttering. It really is a vocal tic. So we're telling people that some of the things that people don't notice are actually these things and not true stuttering. So it's really important to know that, because this is usually brought on a lot more by anxiety or excitement. If they're excited about something, they just can't get it out. So those things. Again, anxiety is not often related to hyperphagia. We have kids who have lots of food issues who don't have anxiety, and we have people who have lots of anxiety and not a lot of food issues. So we kind of tell people that it's not always related. Many children with PWS feel anxious most of the time. If they can really tell you how they're feeling, you can often find that they're anxious low level all the time. It ramps up when things kind of get off schedule. And so for us, and I tell people, I don't listen to their, a lot of kids will say, I feel anxious, but I look more at behaviors. Ramped up, agitated, moving around, touching things, needing to kind of constantly be moving is an actual kind of behavioral sign of anxiety. If they are diagnosed at a younger age, I have kids who are 3 and 4 who are incredibly anxious already. Sometimes it's family driven, so if you have history of depression or anxiety in your family, it can kind of ramp that up. For some kids, temperamentally, they're just kind of more intense when it comes to anxiety. Lots of questions. If your kid is constantly asking you, Mommy, when are we going to do this? And when is that person going to do that? And who is it going to be? And what time is that going to be? That's anxiety, needing for reassurance, insistence on sameness. If something happened in 1975 to them one time, every single time they go to that place, it should happen exactly the same way. And we can't obviously make that work in the real world, so that part's really tough for parents, and it's really tough for teachers. You got 25 students who will completely mess up any plan that you're trying to put in place when it comes to managing a child with PWS. Expectations are so big with them. They have this perfect, I tell people, if anyone have ever seen the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, he gets up in the morning, the same song plays, he talks to the same people, he steps in the same icy puddle. His day is exactly the same, and it's kind of the worst thing ever. If you have PWS, that would be nirvana. To basically get up every morning and have exactly the same thing for breakfast and the same thing, and every interaction you have with people, I say this, you say that, totally scripted, they would love that. And most parents say, I can't live like that. I can't make that happen. So instead, because expectations aren't met in a way that they think should happen, they're continually frustrated. And when they're frustrated, they're angry. And when they're angry, they're falling apart. So it's this idea of shutting down completely can kind of be the next phase. And people will often say, when my kid gets really upset, talk to them, I try to reason to them, and it's like nobody's home. You look at them and it's like they're glazed over, they're mad, they're just not anybody to talk to. So being non-responsive is kind of a way for me, it's like a computer, rebooting. You just kind of like turn it all off, let them go to their room, let them kind of get through those emotions. And you know that when they go to their room and they maybe sleep for a few minutes or do something, they come out and they're like, hey mom, really? We just had this huge big storm and you act like it never happened. So this idea is that for them, they need to be able to reboot before they can actually get back to stuff. So psychosis, a lot of people ask me about this. How common is it? We published a few papers on it, and we'll have a few more that will be coming out this year. So psychosis isn't nearly as high as these people who say 80 or 90% of all people with PWS have it. That really scares a lot of our parents, especially if a kid with UPD have 4-year-olds who are going, okay, so do you think my kid has psychosis? And I go, no, he has an imaginary friend. Well, how is that not psychosis? I go, imaginary friends are a normal part of being 4. Psychosis is something different. So I tell people, very few cases with deletion, but just because your kid has a deletion doesn't mean that it won't happen. So I tell people, don't tell me that, well, my kid has deletion, they couldn't have psychosis. It definitely can happen, and there are definitely some kind of descriptors that we see. Delusional thinking, disorganized thinking, they'll often talk about things that happened 20 years ago, and they make it sound like it just happened. They'll just kind of go on and on. They get stuck on people. That person's looking at me. Why are they giving me the mean face? And they're not even people they even know. That person's not even looking at them. So this idea is they get really stuck on that. We've seen 74 people with UPD, and only 11 had true psychotic features, and that's even as far as past history as well. Not many hallucinations, but definitely magical thinking. They'll often think that people that they see out anywhere are like people that they know, even if they don't know them. They'll go, oh, I know that person. No, we're in another state or in another place. You can't know that person. No, that was my teacher from 3rd grade. And they'll just keep trying to convince you. They get really stuck on it, and they just kind of can't let it go. Did you have a question?
Yeah, do you see it in your experience at any specific age? I mean, I've read it to kids sort of in their 20s, and I'm a 23-year-old with UPD, and I'm always kind of watching this.
Yeah. So we've had a few people who are teenagers who've had that happen, and we've had, most of them have been early 20s. And for a while, we were having people who kept getting diagnosed with schizophrenia, which is that's the onset age, is like in the early 20s. But we've had a few teenagers, but yeah, 20s, but it doesn't mean that it can't happen later. For some of our kids with deletion, 40s, 50s, I mean, that's their first kind of psychotic break. It almost always is related to precipitating stressors. When people get out of school, that's a really big stressor for them. So I'm used to a schedule, I'm used to my teachers, I'm used to my classmates. They get really kind of used to that kind of day-to-day kind of, schedule. When they get out, a lot of parents go, well, there's no services, so my kid's at home. They're on the internet, they're watching TV, and I'm like, oh, that's not good for them. They need structure, they need schedule, they need interaction. So we often find that precipitating events, loss of a boyfriend, loss of a girlfriend, loss of a good friend, loss of a teacher, like as far as like the teacher, if their last teacher they had in school was great, and that person leaves or they go into a next year, they will sometimes get stuck on that teacher and talk about them all the time. And we find that looking at stressors is really important. I know I even had a lady in Canada, and she called me, and she said, well, my kid was definitely psychotic, and she said, but we haven't had any stressors. And if you know me, it's like I don't ever believe what you say the first time. I go, well, let's go back a few months. When did it start? Well, it started in October. What happened in October? Well, nothing, really. Really? And she said, well, actually, we had a dog die. Was it his dog? She goes, yeah, we did the dog 14, 15 years, loved that dog, and he died, and, I go, that was the precipitator. She goes, yeah, but it's a dog. I go, they love animals. I mean, they love animals more than people most days. And so, I get for them it was a huge stressor. So that's kind of what started, and he had all these issues, and he was so depressed, and he kind of got stuck, and he became very psychotic. He actually became suicidal. And so ended up, they put him on the right meds, which is really key. I tell people there's no way to fix it besides meds. And they bought him a dog. And honestly, he loved that dog, and it's the best thing ever. And she was saying, I didn't think that was really a big stressor. That's the thing. Things that are stressful for us, like deaths of, grandparents or whatever, I'll just be really honest, it's not really stressful for them. They're like, oh, is Granny really dead? And they try to touch them. They do weird things, and you go, oh my God, they would never do that to their dog. But this idea is that to them is so much more connection for them than sometimes people are. So just know that things that are stressful for you aren't always stressful for them. Autism and PWS. Again, more common in people with UPD, definitely more common in boys. Poor social communication skills, restricted interest. Some of the people who actually have autism that we diagnose are interested in very odd things. Sometimes people inadvertently kind of reinforce those things. I had a kid who was obsessed with the musical Annie, and he was a 14-year-old boy. That's a very odd thing to be obsessed with. And my whole conversation with him that looked really social was talking about who was the best Annie actress on Broadway. And so we're talking about this, and it was so funny, the person who was coding the tape, she goes, that's so cool, he could talk about Annie. I go, don't you think that's weird? 14-year-old boys don't talk about Annie. And he spent hours a day looking up things on the internet, printing out pictures of Andrea McArdle from the 80s. I mean, it was really interesting how he spent so much time doing that. But also sensory issues. Things too loud, things too overwhelming, things too everything. So anything that was too much was just too much for him. Poor eye contact. A lot of people will look kind of at you, but not really at you. They kind of fleet away, and they kind of look on the side of your head. And you know, for us, even doing these long autism diagnostic interviews, what we really do is when they come down the hallway, I kind of watch what they do. You know, they come towards me. Some kids will just be like, trying to avoid me. You know, they don't want to get too close. And I'm like, I'm not going to hurt you. I find it really interesting how they have this kind of, and they won't really get close to you. And even if they do, it seems kind of odd. They'll sometimes be overly familiar, but they still don't have a real connection with you. They may hug you, but it doesn't really feel like they're actually connecting. And they'll hug complete strangers, like people they don't even know. You're going, that's so weird. So it's this idea that they have some issues with social things. They often lack empathy, and they can't read social cues from other people. They don't know how other people are feeling. If you're mad, that's kind of all they got. Mom's mad at me. Sometimes I'm frustrated. Sometimes I'm all these other, kinds of things. And they're like, no, mad, happy. That's all I got. So this idea is they really have a hard time reading social cues. Again, we have people who have deletions and imprinted mutations who also have autism. So just because you have a kid who doesn't have UPD doesn't mean that you're completely off thing. And some of them definitely have classic autism. If they meet criteria for true autism, then they don't have as many of the PWS features. Food is less of a problem. Some of the other things are less of a problem, but it's interesting because autism definitely seems to overshadow those kids. Most of the cases that we see, even if they get the diagnosis, don't truly meet criteria as far as they don't have true ASD. And I tell people, if that's what you need to get services, you go for it, because I'm the way I look at it. If you get services through that, that's great. But just know that just because your school system or your pediatrician says your kid has autism, it doesn't mean that they meet true criteria, because we're really stringent about it, and we have multiple people rating and things like that. And again, using the gold standard means that we don't inadvertently diagnose people. But I'm totally not against people getting that diagnosis if they can get services. And I know in Canada that's a really big deal here. ADHD, also very common in PWS. Inattentive, distracted, impulsive. Some of the things definitely kind of go away. So for some of our boys, they have more hyperactivity as they're younger, definitely distracted. When we test them, they may be rolling all under the tables. And we do whatever it takes to get all of our assessment battery done. Some common medications may work, but they have side effects. People often tell me about that my kid started Concerta or this other kind of stimulant. They're chewing on their fingernails. They have all these weird tics and things like that. So we tell people sometimes non-stimulants are a better first choice. And you also have to separate anxiety from inattention. Kids who are very anxious look very inattentive. I can't focus on what you're saying because I have all these thoughts and feelings and stuff going on in my head. So we tell people it's really important to know what's anxiety and what's actual inattention. And then idea that behavioral interventions work well for ADHD. Breaking things into little tasks, having breaks, doing things that are more physical in between times that they're sitting in their desk. And again, the hyperactivity tends to get better by about 10 to 12, but I tell people impulsivity continues throughout their lifespan. We have adults who try to get out of a moving car. I have people who do really impulsive, risky things because they have poor impulse control. So that is really important to kind of know that impulsivity kind of continues. And again, some meds work, but more environmental means through schools, through parenting, things like that definitely work just as well sometimes than meds. Vocal and motor tics, a lot more common than when we ever thought. Like I said, about 30% of our folks have, some more boys definitely do them. They repeat sounds, words, and phrases. So I tell people, again, it's not really stuttering when you say, it doesn't sound quite right to them. It is funny when people will try to finish that sentence just to get it over with, and the kid will look at you like, nope, now I have to start over from the beginning. So it's this idea that it seems to be a behavior that's really focused more on anxiety. Also movements, motor tics, kids touching and moving and like constantly kind of doing repetitive movements. We also see touching their mouth, touching their nose. And if your kid gets anxious or kind of agitated, you can always tell right through. They look like they just cannot sit still. So when they're nervous or excited, some kids hand flap, but again, it doesn't seem to be autism. It seems to be kind of like a motor tic. They'll flap, they'll clap, they'll touch their pants. They just have to kind of do something to get all that nervous energy out. So again, a lot more common than we thought. And even people who have deletion are just as common to have motor tics and vocal tics as people with UPD. So some of the skills you need if you're going to work effectively with children with PWS, listening skills. You have to listen to a lot in order to kind of figure out what's going on. And I tell people sometimes my ears are so tired from saying the same things over and over, it's exhausting. So just kind of knowing that that's really important. Being patient, being creative. You sometimes have to outsmart them, outwit them. It's like that, show Survivor. It's like at the end, you try to figure out who's going to be left standing because they have so much ability to kind of manipulate, to get their way. They just really, really need things to go a certain way. And being flexible, being authoritarian, being people who feel like they could just they have to get their needs met. You can't manage a kid with PWS. I mean, at the end of the day, half of the stuff that I say or whatever, they'll go, well, that's a stupid idea, or I don't know why you want me to do that. I don't ever take it personally. And I'll often say, and they'll say, well, you told me that we were going to do X. And even though it wasn't anything anyone ever said, I'll go, well, that's weird. I don't know why I would have said that. But if I did, I'm really sorry. I said, it must just be a Monday. And I apologize. And they'll look at me like, that is not what I was expecting. I wanted to have a big argument about this. And I'll go, so can we just go ahead and do this other thing? And they'll go, I guess so. I mean, again, they're not used to people giving in and being able to kind of say that I'm wrong. So I apologize at least 10, 12 times a day to the people that we see, because it is so much easier for me to kind of take the heat than it is for them to actually say they're wrong. And I'll talk a little bit about that, because for most of you, especially as your kids get older, they are never, ever wrong. It's never their fault. It's whatever. It's always somebody else's fault. So the idea that if we can actually be flexible, we can get them to develop trust in us. And I tell people, I can actually even kind of tease them and say things that are kind of funny in a way that they'll take, because again, they trust me. They know I'm not trying to make fun of them. I'm not trying to make them look bad. It's this idea that we have a relationship of trust. And if you can get them to trust you, you can actually get them to do a ton of stuff that you want them to do. But if they don't quite trust you, and you don't meet their needs, and you don't kind of put things in kind of motion that actually are consistent and reinforcing, they will really struggle. So this idea for us is that we need to develop long-term relationships, because we want them to be able to be successful in whatever environment. So parents are the biggest factor. People always ask me, every kid with PWS comes with a different kind of temperament and whatever. But for us, parents really do tell us what they are willing to do and what they're not willing to do. So I often tell people, I have people who have a 5-year-old, they'll come in, they'll go, we've got them in hippotherapy, and we're doing PT and OT and speech, and basically they're spending 20 hours a week outside of school doing all these interventions. I'm like, so now that you've met my kid, what else should I be doing? Take a damn vacation. I mean, I can't imagine. And they're just so sure that this is, and I go, this isn't sustainable. I mean, knowing what I know and seeing as many teenagers and adults as I do, you can't sustain this. And one parent was like, vacation? I said, leave the kids at grandma's house. The two of you just go somewhere for a long weekend. Do not talk about your kids. Do not call your kids. Just get away from them. She's like, I don't really like this idea. And her husband was over there smiling, going, I really like this idea. So, several months pass, and she gives me a call. She said, we actually ended up doing that. My husband just said that was the one advice that she gave us, and I think we're going to do that. So they did it. She got pregnant again, which was real. I said, that's not me. I'm just going to not take any responsibility for that. And she said having another child was probably the best thing they could ever do. It took all the focus off the one kid with PWS. And so we're talking about this idea that for our parents, this idea of getting balance, and idea that it's a long-term marathon. I mean, I, again, see people who have 50-year-olds who live at home. They may be 82 years old, but they have a 50-year-old living at home. There aren't a ton of residential services. There are not a tons of places that people can go. So for a lot of our families, it's knowing that this is a long-term proposition, that the level of care and supervision your kid's going to need is going to be lifelong. So you do have to pace yourself. You do have to have balance in your life. So when people are just so kind of hyper-focused on their kid with PWS and what should I do and what should I do? Well, if you have other kids and spouses and friends and other family members, I'm sure they look at you and go, wow, you're living life looking through a microscope, right? My kid is doing this. I have to work on this. It's okay sometimes to say, I'm not willing to do that. It's okay. I have one family, and I think it's kind of funny because the mom's been married, and I'm not kidding, 7 times. I can't even imagine. This kid has had 6 stepfathers, and he has so many different addresses. I don't even keep I always keep a paper copy because I'm really old school, but I stopped doing that because honestly I don't have anywhere else to write a new last name and address where they now live. And the mom can't tell me what his teacher's name is. She can't remember what the last book he's read, and he's, just so you know, in high school. Just really doesn't know anything about him, and I'm always like, and so I was saying, and he's really a really delightful young man. I'll just be very honest. He has very few behavior problems. He's pretty sweet. And I was teasing her after she got married for the 7th time. I said, I don't understand how people like you can have a kid that's so great and other people who do everything right don't. And she looks at me and she goes, hey! I go, well, I'm just going to be really honest. He's been raised by wolves for the most part. It's a wonder he's actually doing so well. And she admitted that for him, it was really more an issue of temperament. So I tell people, being a good parent means kind of giving yourself a break sometimes and not holding yourself to a very lofty goal that you can't imagine. But this young man weighed 209 pounds at 9. And the mom was like, do you think he's overweight?
Oh, no.
Yeah, he's way overweight. And she's like, well, I don't know what I should do. I make him exercise. I go, what do you do? She goes, well, I make him go outside and I lock the door. Yeah, that's a great idea. And I said, what does he do? She goes, well, he won't walk. He just sits at the door and whines and cries until I let him in like a dog. And I go, well, you should go out there. He's an only child. You should go out there and walk around with him. And, I have a Fitbit. I'm a big believer that you have to have ways to kind of keep them so they're competitive. And I compete with a lot of my patients because they like to know how many steps I got today and that kind of stuff. But she was like, oh, but I don't lock food. And she was trying to explain to me that all he eats is broccoli. And she went on. And I said, Preston, what are your 3 favorite foods? He goes, macaroni and cheese, pizza, and lasagna. And I looked at the mom and I said, do you know they don't lie? All I have to do is ask. And he's telling me I'm not eating. I hate broccoli. So the idea is that he had a very poor diet. I told her, I said, if you don't start locking stuff and doing all these other things, he's not going to be around in a few more years. And she was very upset with me and very angry and cried and left. Sometimes that plants a seed. And so a couple years later, she locked the food. She did all these things. He now gets 900 calories a day. He plays on several teams at high school. He's doing great. He exercises several hours a day. He's thinner than he's ever been. And it took that for her to have that wake-up call. And she was actually being seen at a clinic, at the weight loss clinic. She was being seen for everywhere. And nobody would really say this because they go, well, he's got Prader-Willi. There's nothing we can do. What? There's a lot of things we can do. So the idea is for them, it took that for her to kind of realize that there was something that she could do. So as far as genetics, how much control do you actually have over your child's behavior? Some of it's environment, some of it you can't control, like what happens at school and whatever else. Some of it you can. Some of it's genetics, and I tell people the stubbornness, some of the kinds of state qualities of PWS, we don't change a whole lot. We can work with it. And then some of it's parenting. So it's not all under your control. You've got this part, and this is kind of like your kid with PWS right there in the middle. Those things all interact to actually kind of make your kid the unique individual that they are. But you do have some control. You don't have all the control. So I tell people it's this idea of kind of knowing what you can and can't fix. So when people ask me about certain characteristics, I'm like, well, I don't think we can fix that. These are the things we can. So we try to focus on the things that are actually changeable. So for a lot of parents, once they get diagnosed, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, now what? And for people who get diagnosed, some of your probably kids were diagnosed at birth, they're diagnosed really early, so you've had this kind of lifelong, my kid has this, and these are the things that I need to do. I actually follow 5 families whose kids were diagnosed in their 20s, which really shocks me. And it wasn't because they didn't have PWS. It was because they were either more mildly affected or they had other issues that didn't look like PWS. They're the families that struggle the most. The people who are diagnosed later seem to really struggle because for so many years they either A, didn't know what their kid had, or B, they thought they had something else. And I have a family that I follow in Pennsylvania. Their kid was diagnosed with neurofibromatosa, which is another genetic disorder. And yes, he does have that. But he was missed for PWS until he was 23 years of age. And now with the food issues and everything else, she's really struggling. And she said, it makes me feel so sad for my son that he's really struggling with this. I said, but it's like finding out at 23 that you were adopted. I thought these people were my family. I thought this was my life. And suddenly you find out that nothing that you knew is actually true anymore. So for a lot of our families, knowing that early diagnosis helps. But again, as Heather was saying, there's a lot of information and there's a little information. There's a lot of things that you hear and read that simply aren't true. And I even have parents now who are just diagnosed, the stuff that people or geneticists are telling them, it's 20 years old. It hadn't been true for many, many years. And this idea that if your kid is younger, there's a completely different trajectory that you're going to be on because of growth hormone, whatever. And some of that's true. Your kid's going to be taller. They're probably going to have better cognitive ability. Some of those things are true. But what's not true is that it's not completely different. Those kids still develop hyperphagia, and they still have some of the behavior problems. So I think as a parent, it's this idea that you understand every kid is different. You have to kind of continue to adapt and change. It's like sailing a boat. If you get on a boat, you set the sail and you go, I'm going, here. If you don't ever adjust course, change what you're doing, you're going to run into a piece of land or a big rock or another boat. You have to constantly be changing. And for a lot of parents, they go, hey, I figured it out. We're doing everything right. I'm like, well, that's great. I said, but know that things are going to change. He's going to be 14 next year, or he's going to be 17, and suddenly you now have new issues. So you always have to adapt and change depending on what's happening. And you can't bury your head in the sand and go, oh, it's just too hard because your kid needs you. So common behavior issues. Again, delays in understanding, motor skills, speech, everybody kind of knows those things are definitely part of the early PWS phenotype. Compliance issues. If you want them to do something, they never want to do that thing, do they? They look at you and go, I don't think so. And they have a stubborn streak a mile wide. And like I said, I have to say, well, it's really pretty and sunny outside. Well, no, Elizabeth, it's only partly cloudy. I mean, they always have to correct me. I'm good with that. I go, well, I'm not a meteorologist, so whatever. It's like, they had that real issue with needing to be right. Demanding, they need things a certain way, they need you to be a certain way. Even sometimes the tone of your voice. If they say a question, they'll often need you to say it in a certain way, and you just go, I said that. Well, you didn't say it the same way. Great. So they have these ideas with being demanding. They often have temper tantrums. When they get really anxious and upset about something, they fall apart. It's like a pressure cooker. The lid blows off, they get really upset, and they can't manage. Stubbornness, needing things to be their way. Even with siblings, right? They'll go, well, she did this to me. Well, you did that to her. Well, I know, but she's not supposed to do that to me. They really get stuck on the idea that things are supposed to be fair and equal. Sometimes food issues emerge, odd repetitive behaviors. We have people who will sometimes chew on things. They have all these sensory issues and things like that. But again, those things tend to go away as people get older. Sensory seeking behaviors, emotional outbursts, shutting down. For some people, as they get probably about 10 to 12, aggression starts to emerge. They're maybe hurting classmates, they're pushing people, and generally it's usually provoked. People get too close to them. I had a girl who ended up pulling somebody's hair, but the girl in front of her kept swinging her hair and hitting her in the face. She could have moved, she could have told the teacher. There were like 50 other things she could have done, but what did she do? She yanks the girl's hair and really hard, and she got in trouble for that. So the idea is that for them, they're not really good problem solvers. They tend to use aggression as a way to deal with threatening behavior. If somebody threatens them by standing too close, to looking at them a certain way, anything like that, they will often lash out in aggression. But it's not, again, they don't see it as being unprovoked. They see it as being very much provoked. And then avoidant behaviors. We have kids who go to the bathroom and they're there for hours a day, and I'm always like, And the teacher will say, well, she says she has to go to the bathroom, and who am I to argue with her? But I had a girl who was in the bathroom upwards of 6 hours a day in middle school. And so the teacher was saying, well, she has GI issues. And the mom was saying she had GI issues. I go, she's not learning anything. I said, so she gets 2 bathroom breaks a day at a certain time. She doesn't get to pick them. They're decided for her. Any class that she's been actively avoiding, which is math and something else, she doesn't get a bathroom break in those. She has to sit through those classes. And she started being able to sit through a class and doing that kind of stuff. So it's really easy for them to feign sickness, illness, GI issues. I had a kid who kept saying he needed to poop all the time, and he was going to the bathroom again all the time. But when I started looking at when those things happened, it was always at the same time every day. He didn't like circle time. He didn't like sitting with other kids on the mat. For some reason, it was too overwhelming. So he would go to the bathroom, sit there in the bathroom, probably hanging out, and then he'd go, circle time's over. He'd be right back in the mix. So it's this idea that we have to look at what kinds of things are avoidant behaviors. And if people tell me that somebody's seeing the school nurse on a regular basis, the school nurse is either A, the nicest person ever, or she's giving them food. It's usually one of those 2 issues. So you just have to kind of know, what are they getting out of the situation? And I mean, I would be sick too if, I could actually go hang out with the school nurse instead of being with my classroom. Perseveration. If they like to talk about something, they like to talk about it a lot. So for a lot of families, they get really kind of stuck like that, and they have these long conversations about schedules or when things are going to happen or things like that. And I think for us, it's this idea that People always think if I just explain it the right way or use the right words or tell them what they need to know, they'll stop asking. No, they won't. They like to do something until they are done. They don't care about what you want, what they want to do. So they can't move on unless they're done. So I tell people, concrete reminders. I will only let them talk about something for so many minutes, and I do. I have a timer on my desk. You get 3 minutes to talk about Annie. Go. Talk about Annie. The timer being, I go, we're done with Annie. And I love this because they always go, well, yeah, but I wasn't done talking about Annie. Yeah, but the timer has gone off, and that's all we get. It's all the time we have. And they're always like, okay. So that we have to kind of help them move along. They don't generally want to do that. Visual and verbal reminders. Getting things done. If they perseverate on something they like to do but don't do the things that you need them to do. I had a woman who said, my kid misses the school bus every day because he can't get his shoes on. Can he tie his shoes? Can he put his shoes on? Yeah, it's not that. It's just that he can't. So if it were me, I would make his book bag packed. He has to do everything before he eats breakfast. And I will tell you, he will be catching that school bus. And sure enough, when she actually had his breakfast waiting on the other side of shoe putting on and book bag packing, he was making the bus. So this idea is they will often, kind of really drag things out in a way to get what they want. You taking them to school, them not having to ride the school bus, or whatever it is. So you have to know that some of those things you have to be creative and come up with a way to get them to do that. People even do that about bathing. My kid, to go to bed, it takes us 2.5 hours of yelling, screaming, nagging, whatever else to get my kid to take a shower, to brush their teeth, do all these other things. I said, no. I said, you need to find a way for them to actually do all those things. And at the end of that, there's something they want to do. iPad time, reading them stories, snuggling, whatever it is, so that they actually have something on the other end of those activities so that it makes it worth their while. They're going to drag their feet if they know that they get your kind of, not really undivided, but they get your attention for several hours a night. And it's not positive, but it doesn't matter to them most of the time. They want your attention. So the idea is that if you give it to them while they're doing all these other avoidant things, they're going to drag their feet forever. But if you put it at the end and say, I'm not going to deal with you until you're brushed, ready to go to shower, all that kind of stuff, ready to go to bed. So for a lot of parents, it's knowing you have to figure out what they're getting out of those situations. And then natural transitions. Eating is a huge natural transition. I'm never going to keep anybody from their food if they have Prader-Willi syndrome, but I will put food at the end of something that they don't want to do so that I can get what I need done with what they need to get done. And we'll have kids who, we spend about 6 to 7 hours with families when they're there, and it'll be like, the kid will be like, Elizabeth, I'm so tired of doing this. I don't really want to do anymore. I'm like, well, great. I said, so as soon as we get all this done, then you get to go to lunch. And they're like, oh. I mean, not that they're not going to eat, but the quicker you get it done, the quicker you're going to go to lunch. So they will often kind of regroup. We take breaks. We actually will go get a drink of water. We'll walk down the hall. We find little ways to kind of make it so it's kind of worth their while. You can find natural transitions to be a really big motivator for kids with Prader-Willi syndrome. They like to eat. They like to do certain things. Use those as ways to get what you need done. Questions. People always say, again, if I just give them the right information, they'll stop doing those things. But they ask lots of questions about schedules. When is that going to happen? When are we going to do that? What time is that going to be? Who's going to be there? They just need to know lots and lots of details. And if you go someplace you haven't been before, it's exhausting, right? Well, what are they going to have to eat? What kind of plates are they going to be? I don't know. And if you say you don't know, that really stresses them out. They think you should know everything. I had a kid who was driving with his mom along the interstate, and they get into traffic. The mom's kind of looking around, and Patrick's in the back seat. He goes, well, what's the deal? She goes, I don't know. Well, why are we stopped? Patrick, I don't have any idea. I mean, whatever it is, I can't see it. He's looking out the windows. He's just whatever, stressing out. And the next thing you know, he opens the back door and gets out on the interstate in stop traffic, and he's running around. She's like, great. So she gets out there, corrals him back into the car and whatever else, and thank God nobody got hurt. And she said he was so stressed out about that, Elizabeth. It was crazy. And he could have been killed. And I said, yeah. And she said, I don't know why he gets like that. I said, well, think about when he was here. He came here, he walked by the boys' bathroom, and the boys' bathroom has an out-of-order sign on it. And he goes, well, what's the deal with the boys' bathroom? I go, I don't know. I said, I guess it's out of order. And he goes, huh. So he goes in, he's testing with one of our graduate students. For what, 20 minutes, she goes, you're like, we can't get anything done. He just keeps asking me, what's wrong with the bathroom? Does anyone know about it? What's the problem? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh. So I said, well, Patrick, thank you for letting me know. I am sorry that it's stressing you out, but I will take care of it. I pick up the phone, call the maintenance guy, I go, well, it looks like the bathroom is clogged up. They'll get it fixed, but it probably won't be fixed before you leave today. But they appreciate you letting them know. He walks out, he gets all of his testing done, all is good, and the mom goes, that's great. I said, I don't even know who does maintenance on this building. I just completely pretended that entire phone call because he needed to know that I was taking care of it. So now she has the Maryland Department of Transportation on her phone. Yeah, right. And she often calls about some traffic situation that's happening. She'll go, well, okay, there's an accident. Well, how long do you think you're not sure how long the delay will be. Oh, okay. But everyone is fine, and as soon as you can get us rerouted, we'll be on our way. Patrick, I've spoken with the Maryland Department of Transportation, and she relays the whole thing. She's like, okay, he's fine. He needs to know that you're taking care of it. So my thought is if you need to do that to get them to move on, there is nothing wrong with being able to reassure them about things that are absolutely insane that you can't control. I have people who call me, apparently. Elizabeth said, you need to go ahead and do that. Okay. And she said, well, I'm always worried she's going to say, do you want to talk to her or whatever. I said, but that's the thing. If you tell them, do you want to talk to Elizabeth? They're not going to want to talk to me. So no, I've just told them the very thing you said. No, it's okay. Yeah, all right, I'll do it. So this idea is you need to use whoever you need to use. I have people who have hoarding children who have 100 books stacked up. I mean, it's a fire hazard. Call the freaking fire marshal. Have them come to your house and go, nope, this stuff's got to be moved. It's a fire hazard or whatever else. And the kid will be like, well, the fire marshal told me we had to move that. You can say that, and they don't care. But if the fire marshal says it, then they will actually often do it. So figure out, and I have that with doctors. If they like their doctor and you need them to do things like brush their teeth, then have the doctor go, so John, do you brush your teeth for 2 minutes a day? And John will go, yeah, most of the time I do. And you're like, oh, John, it's so important for your general health for you to brush 2 minutes. I find that using a timer or a toothbrush that's time for 2 minutes is what I do. I actually have one handy that I'm going to give you today and you're going to use. And the kid's like, oh, my doctor told me I should do this. And you can get them to do stuff. If other people tell them to do it, then you can. So again, use other people to kind of help make these things better. Limit questions to 3. I never answer questions more than 3 times. And I had a mom who was answering her kids. She was homeschooling her child. She was answering questions sometimes 100, 200, 300 times a day. Literally couldn't get anything done. And she said, Kayla will not allow me to not answer. I said, oh, that's so cute that you believe that. But as long as you keep answering, she's going to keep asking. So it was really funny. We had a whole day, and she wanted to know when the doctor was going to do a physical. And I said, well, he'll be after this. And I said, I'm only going to answer that question 3 times. Because I knew she'd keep asking. She was very anxious about it. Well, what time is the doctor coming? I said, that'll be the 2nd time. He'll be coming after this x-ray we're going to do, and he'll be doing your physical. And I'm only going to answer it 1 more time, she goes. So is he coming right after this? Yes, Kayla, for the 3rd time. He's coming right after this. And I'm not going to answer it again. And within seconds, she's laying there on the x-ray table waiting for it to start. She leans up, she goes, and I looked at her, I go, I'm done. She goes, fine. She lays her head down, and she's done. And I told her mom, I said, you cannot allow her to hold you hostage here. And the mom started using these things. And I said, just know, it's not going to be easy at first, because she's going to keep on, and she's going to try to trick you. She's going to go, yeah, you said 10 o'clock, and you know it's 11. You're like, you just smile at them and go, yeah, whatever. Do not let them engage you. They will often tell you misinformation to get you to answer it again. Don't get stuck with doing that. They're going to find whatever ways to manipulate that. And then again, let them self-check. What did I say? Well, you said 10. There we go. You know. And if you ask them a question that they ask you 100 times, 99.9% of the time, they already know the answer. They just need you to say it. So the idea is you have to stop it, they can't. And one young lady who followed her mom around, she was at home all the time, and her mom was just crazy with this girl asking her questions all day long. And I told the mom, you have the power to stop it, and she's not going to be happy with it. And this girl was very high functioning. After the mom stopped, I said, just don't talk to her. The girl's walking around, she goes, I'm calling Adult Protective Services on you because this is emotional abuse. And the mom turned around and looked at her, she said, just nodded her head and walked away. She said, our whole dynamics in our family have changed. I spent my day redirecting, answering questions, dealing with all of the issues that she needed. She said it's become so much more pleasant. You actually play the game along with them, If you don't play the game, neither can they. That's the same thing with arguing. Parents need to argue with their kid and correct them. Why? Why does it matter? They're like, but they're wrong. Who cares? Does it matter in any way? It really doesn't. But parents will go, well, that's not right. I'm like, or somehow they're letting them get away with something. You're not. You're just not engaging with that kind of behavior. I tell people it's like the post office, right? You know, I've been several times when they just like, I'm walking up and they'll just go, shut the window. I'm like, we're closed. We're just open. And they're like, nope, it's 5:01. We're closed. So you can do that too. Slide the window shut. Don't engage. If you're not home, they can't do that with you. And again, I mean, if you need to go to another room, I said, I take a time out myself. I'm going to take a time out and go hang out, whatever. Do what you need to. If you can't get them to like leave, you leave. If there's nothing wrong with doing that, but you engaging them will only make it worse. Stubbornness, they feel like they have to be right, has to be their way, and they have to have the last word, right? And I let them have the last word. I do not care. I told you. I know it's right. Yep. Walk away. It doesn't matter. But people somehow think that they're going to correct their kid and their kid's going to stop doing that. They won't stop. So you have to. Again, allowing 2 choices on stubbornness. Well, I don't want to do spelling. Okay, what if you do math or English? These words, whatever. They will often, if you give them 2 choices, no more than 2 choices, they will sometimes be able to get unstuck. And that's really true in a classroom. They allow them to have some level of control. They control so little in their life. I don't care if they pick what they do next. It doesn't matter to me one bit. And I do have graduate students who, well, it's so much more efficient if we do it this way. Well, good luck to you, because let me tell you, and I've had kids come flying into my office and go, Nate won't let me pick the next thing on the list. He said he has to do it this way. And I go, well, Nate, let's see how you work this out. I don't think it matters. As long as they get everything done, who cares? So the idea of letting them find a way to say yes. I'll have kids who go, I want to have lunch. It's 8:10. I go, me too. What time is it? Well, it's 8:10. Well, we don't usually eat lunch till 12, so I think we'll eat lunch at 12. Does that sound good to you? Yeah, that does sound good to me. Great. Sounds like a plan. Go back in there. The idea is find a way to say yes. You can say yes and be a graceful winner and loser. Do not have to have the last word. Do not always have to be right. And again, when you try to win over them, and I've had graduate students who think they're so clever when they get them to do something they want, and they'll kind of smile, the kid will go, were you laughing at me? No, I wasn't laughing at you. Yes, you were. And it's like, don't gloat. If you're right and they have to say they're wrong, don't gloat. Just be good. Be a graceful loser and a winner. If you have genetic subtypes, we know that people who have deletions are more likely to have skin picking, a lot more likely to have tantrums, those with UPD, higher verbal skills, but poor visual spatial functioning. So they sometimes won't be able to find their way out of certain places. They won't be able to find their way to certain places. Those are hard for them. UPD, more psychotic episodes, more ASD in those with UPD. And we don't know a whole lot about imprinting defects or translocations, but I will say that we have enough imprinting defects now in our very large sample. Imprinting defects look a lot like people with UPD. So again, they're more rare, but they seem to have almost exactly the same kind of like trajectory as people with UPD. Oppositional behavior. They will often need to say no before they say yes, and I'm okay with that. Well, I don't want to do that. Yeah, me either. We still need to get it done. And they're like, oh, okay. It's okay. They will want it that way every time. So if you can get them to cooperate, buy into like a situation, I'll often go, well, we need to get these 4 things done. What do you think we should do first? Let them pick. Let them do those kinds of things and let them have some control. Compromise is a really good way to do. People want to negotiate. It's like a hostage situation. Somebody's going to die. It's going to be really bad. But you can get them to actually compromise. I'll be willing to give up this. What would you be willing to give in? Sometimes they can actually do that. And then know what you're willing to let them live with. I mean, if you threaten them or issue ultimatums, let me tell you, they will get you to the mat every single time. I have parents who say such stupid things. Well, I'm taking away your iPad till you're 37. You're not, and you're not going to make them do that. So don't threaten them with things you're not willing to do. Again, I don't ever threaten them. I don't ever need to do that, because once you start that, you start the arguing, you start all the other kinds of oppositional behavior. So if you don't have to do that, don't. Aggressive behavior, it happens when frustration and emotions are high. No, when they're becoming agitated. People often tell me, especially teachers, I didn't know it was going to happen. I didn't know this really hurtful thing was. It's like, man, I'm in the classroom going, oh, it's on. Look at them. They're agitated. They're rustling in their seat. They're messing with stuff. And then they start touching other people. It escalates. So I tell people, do not, ignore that behavior. Validate, feelings, but not behavior. If somebody's really upset, I've walked into a testing room where everything is just off the table. It's kind of a mess. I go, hey, what's going on here? I know exactly what's going on here. The kid will go, well, this thing happened. I go, oh, well, you sound very upset. I'm really sorry about that. We're going to pick everything up, and we're going to go get back to work so you can go to lunch and do whatever. I know you're going to have a great time. And we'll often change people. If somebody's having a problem with them, it is so much easier to go, Nate, you're out. Haley, you're up. You're in the pit. So we basically just have other people come in and take over. And if a kid's really having an issue with a person or a task, I'll go, hey, we need to get these 5 things done. Who do you want to do it with you? And they'll look around, sizing everybody up. I want you. Great. There you go. You have some control, and I don't care. I just want my stuff done. And again, if you can validate feelings but not excuse behavior, you'll find that they need you to know that they're upset. Avoid eye contact, but don't look scared. People who look them in the eye and try to do this confrontational thing, that is never going to work. I just kind of when they're upset, I'll go, well, you're obviously upset, so just let me know when you're ready to get back to work. I'm just going to kind of hang out over here, pretend I'm writing stuff down. I'm not. And they'll look at me and they'll go, oh, I'm obviously not upset. And they'll go, well, okay, I'm ready to get back to it. Great. I never talk about it again. It's like it never happened. I just wipe the slate clean. Again, keep your voice and your face calm. Make sure that you and other people aren't close to them. I don't know why I have people who have meltdowns and people literally walk over to them and need to get in their face. Well, John, I need you to get off the floor now. I'm like, man, John's going to swing out at you and hit you, and you're going to be like, oh, he hit me. And I'm going to be like, dude, don't get so close. I just stand away from them and just act like a psych hospital. I'm waiting for you to get it together. Often, if you give them the space and the kind of physical and, actual emotional space to get it together, they will get it together so much quicker than you getting in their face and getting close to them or physically trying to move them or make them do something. I had a teacher once who was trying to make this young man do his homework, and he's in high school, and eventually, folds his arm. Not doing it. And she just kept arguing and arguing, so she ends up grabbing one of his arms and trying to get him to hold a pencil. I asked his mom, she tells me the story. I said, did he bite her? Did he hit her? She goes, Elizabeth, he did both. I go, sounds right. And that same teacher was like, I wanted him to do it. You can want it all you want. You can't make them do it. But you can get them to do a lot of things if you sell it the right way. So again, touching them, trying to physically intervene, give them a safe place. If you're in a classroom or home, buy a beanbag. Here's your, and I always tell people, don't call it a timeout place. Kids know that's a bad place to be. I just kind of say it's your kind of cool down pad. You just go over there, just kind of chill out, do whatever. Some people put on headphones. They rock out a little bit, they go to sleep, whatever, and then they come back and they're able to get it together. Make sure other people are safe. And again, have a plan before it happens. Don't try to wing this. It will work out so badly every time. Visual schedules and natural transitions, I'm going to talk a little bit about. We do this at school, but it works really well at home. You will often find that school breaks, summertime, bad time. They can't handle things that are not structured. You can actually do some of these things. Brushing your teeth. They like checking things off. They like getting stickers. Even kids who are adults really like those things. Doing all those things, checking them all off. And I tell people, a lot of the kids really don't like to brush their teeth, and their teeth are hideous. And now I'll go, do the breath test. Oh, yeah, there you go. You did a good job of brushing those teeth. I can smell the fresh breath and whatever else. You can get them to do that, but they need lots of verbal praise and they need lots of prompts. But doing this means you don't have to keep nagging them to do all those steps. Getting ready for school, what do you need to do? They often get really overwhelmed. If you say clean up your room, what do? They're over there stacking 3 things and come back 2 hours later, nothing's done. I tell people they can't deal with that. Give them exact tasks. Pull your sheets up, pull your blankets up, do this. You literally have to break it into small tasks. And if you do those kinds of things, you'll find that they're much better. Transitions are really hard for them. Visual cues, timers, verbal cues. When they start to get upset, hey, everybody's cool here, it's all calm, no worries, whatever. Have ways for them to kind of self-talk and get themselves out of those things. And again, don't get them too used to a groove that you can't do. I have people who, only mom turns out bedroom lights. Well, that's great until mom's not there and the kids can't go to sleep because mom's not there to turn out the lights. repetition leads to intolerance. It used to be that we used to tell people, keep them on a schedule, do this. I think that's a really bad advice for parents now. You have to have some level of schedule. Don't get me wrong, they need to eat on a schedule. But the idea that everything is going to go exactly the same, it's not fair to them because the world doesn't work that way. So have a groove, but do little baby steps. If they make you go a certain way to the school or to your church or home, every once in a while have crazy Friday where you just go a different way. And they'll be like, what? Yeah, I know, we're going to try this new way. And it's perfectly okay to do little baby steps to have them be able to deal with transitions and change. Hard now or easy later. It is definitely kind of a tough transition to get them to be more flexible and more kind of compliant, things like that. But I have people who just don't want to fight. They won't want to rock the boat. Elizabeth, she'll be so upset if I do those things. Oh, yeah. But let me tell you, having a 5-year-old having a meltdown is a lot better than a 35-year-old who you're trying to go, oh, okay, I don't know what to do with this. So the idea is if you make it easy now, it really will be hard later. So no, doing the work, building up transitions, getting your kid to comply is really a really important thing to do when your kid is small. And again, even if your kid is older, you can always make changes. But what you can't do is think that they're going to make changes. Always you, never them. So getting dressed, again, anything that you need them to do that they don't want to do, bright eye affect. I always tell people, it's, we're like flight attendants in our office. It's like everybody, so-and-so's coming in. Places everybody. We're all happy to be here. People go, I've had a crappy day. I was late. I don't care. Sell it. So it's like everybody has to do that. Smiling, happy, whatever. They really watch people's faces for happy faces. Like the minute you kind of do a frown or even when I look down sometimes reading something, are you okay? Yeah, I'm reading the questions here. I'm sorry. So then I'm like, okay. So it's important for you to have that bright affect. Be confident. I tell people, even if things are going badly, we always act like we know what we're doing. Even if we really don't. We had a fire alarm go off one time and it wouldn't stop going off. And I was like, my God. So anyway, I was like, let's go take a lap around the campus and then we'll come back and we'll go back to it. And it was like, we always act like this is something that happens to us all the time, even if it's not. So acting like you can deal with it. And I have parents who say, I can't deal with this. Don't tell your kid that. The minute you kind of do, I can't deal with this, they know it, and they kind of are always needing you to be in control so that they can feel in control. They're repetitive, they're slow, they're not motivated, they're going to do things in a certain way. You can find ways to motivate them by being happy and selling them on an idea. Oh my gosh, and no matter what happens, we had somebody who had a tornado siren. We live in Tennessee, and sadly that happened on occasion. I'm like, tornado sirens, we need to get, I knew this would stress this kid out. I'm like, wait, we're in a block building. We're kind of in the most inner room. Like where he is now is about the safest place he could possibly be. So we close all the doors, and he goes, "What's that noise?" I go, "It's the machine getting ready to do your EEG." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And it's like, we just go with whatever's happening. And he did it, and his parents came, and like I said, I guess you guys heard they're from a place where this never happens. I go, yeah. He was fine, all was good. She said, "Did you tell him there was a tornado?" So I go, "No, I would freak him out. I didn't do that." I said, "It was the machine." And he just goes, I said, "Yeah, we lie when it really works for us because honestly, they need to know that we have this." And again, there was nothing we could do about it. So the idea is we try to work with the reality that it is. Low expressed emotion, you're not angry, you're not whatever. It's really hard for people to kind of bring that down. But I tell people, even when kids really get on my last nerve, I try really hard not to ever let them know it. I had a kid who kept breaking stuff, and he'd just rip up sheets, and I'd be like, okay. And it was like, he goes, "Is this making you mad? Are you disappointed in me?" I said, "No." I said, the way I look at it, I said, "I guess you'll just go home today without getting anything done." And I said, "And I so wanted you to go to the prize box. I had put in a whole bunch of new items last night and kind of wanted you to pick up something." And he goes, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Do you have any tape?" I go, "Well, I do. I said, "Let me just get you a new sheet. It's all good." But it's the idea that we don't get upset. You're bright, you're calm, you're confident. If you believe that you can get them to comply, a lot of times they will believe it. If they see that little flicker of doubt, they're like, "Ha-ha, I got him. I see a flicker. I see a little bit of impatience, a little bit of contempt." And they work that, right? They have such a need to kind of mess up things that you want to have happen. Again, negotiating is basically the same thing as arguing and bargaining. Don't get stuck about that. Be clear about expectations. I like to have them in writing. If somebody's old enough, I literally have them write the things down that they need to do. We put stickers beside them as they get them done. Do them before the situation is. And if an argument starts, do not engage. People will go, oh, I'll just say this one thing. No. There are times I just look at them and my mouth is closed. I'm just so mad that I'm like, I feel like Mother Teresa on the outside, anger on the inside. But again, if they can't control their emotions, you need to control yours. And we do have people who say, well, they make me so angry. I know, but you have to keep it together because they really look to you as being kind of the outside influence that kind of helps them be able to figure it out. When they shut down, usually they're overstimulated, frustrated, and they're too upset to give you a response. So don't talk to them. Just leave them alone. And if they're too angry to actually do that, people will try, like I said, to reason with them, to use logic. They're not logical people. You should all know this about your kid. There's nothing about them that makes you go, oh, I follow the logic, and at the end we come to the same conclusion. They don't. They come to some completely crazy solution. So the idea that you have to kind of help them calm down, reading body cues, and anticipate problems and respond, not react. Don't react in a way that's really immediate because you will find once they get you off balance, then they can really get what they want because that's what they do. And they wear people down. I always say we have adult parents who come in and they just go, so tired of doing this every day. They will wear you down. You have to find ways to cope, manage, and kind of keep it together because they are exhausting people. And unfortunately, they weirdly like doing that to people, so don't let them do it to you. Again, cueing, visual timers, limits on topics, cooling down. You take a time out, they don't have to take a time out. And then figure out, sometimes medications work well to kind of help some of the compulsive behavior, some of the stuck behavior. But being connected socially, vocationally, recreational, having things to do and engagement can really make a big difference. We often ask people to consider applied behavior analysis, like in schools or even in homes, to figure out what the triggers are. People often say, I don't know what the triggers are, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. People who do ABA are really good at going, well, it's this or it's that. They're kind of outsiders, and sometimes, when you're doing the day-to-day battle, it's really hard to figure out what's going on. I tell people, it's like trying to figure out what's going on from a foxhole level. All you can see is like feet and smoke and whatever else. They're like generals. They're up on the hill going, oh, you know what, here's what we have going on, and they're able to kind of help redirect you. What works? Allowing them to calm down. You can't make them calm down, but you can give them the place to calm down. Letting them decide when they're ready to return to a situation. I always just kind of say, hey, you let me know when you're ready to get back to it. Never any big deal to me, even if it is a big deal to me. I just act like it's no big deal. And I do not demand an apology. Even if they break something, I tell people, even if they say they're sorry, it's like this, sorry. That felt very genuine. I really feel like I've been validated here. So who cares? But I'll have teachers who've had a huge big outburst in the class. The kid's gone. Come back the next day. And what does that teacher say when that kid walks in? I sure hope you don't do what you did yesterday. Hello? Welcome to the world of it's going to happen again. They have such a need to say it. So again, if you want to return to balance, and you don't have to always be right, because right means they have to be wrong. And I will tell you, they are never wrong, even when they're so wrong. So it doesn't matter. So this idea that you have to be flexible and you have to sometimes let them have their way. Well, that was the end of it. So you guys, I'm sure, have questions about your kids. So feel free to raise your hands and give me what problems you're having. This obviously is not everything that is PWS, but anybody have issues that they're having that they're wanting to kind of walk through?
So in our family, we can deal with it. If he behaves like that, we just can live with it. But then you get out into the real world, in the workplace or something, and you have a problem with not being able to let a subject go.
Yeah.
And not every stranger out there is willing to just accept that in the workplace
Mm-hmm.
and in relationships with his friends. And it's become a barrier to friendships because if the subject comes up that they don't agree on, and then he's just going to argue to the end and then say, I don't even want to talk to you again.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say, well, we just don't engage, but how we can apply that to real life outside our home.
For people he has like an ongoing relationship, I think it's really important, like especially if somebody will come to you. Let's say somebody goes, Bill's being so unreasonable. He wanted me to do blah, blah, blah. And so I would just let them kind of talk, and then I go, so what you're doing, how's that working out for you? And they'll go, not very well. Of course, they think it's all Bill, and don't get me wrong, it kind of is. If they have an ongoing relationship, I would always say, Well, generally what we find that works really well is to limit this or do whatever. And again, you know, for Bill, it's like this idea is I feel like a lot of people, if you have to have regular interactions, and that would be true of like support staff or even people who work in a work setting, to let them know that these are the things that work well for them and these other things won't. So, and I tell people if they continue to have problems, it's like any regular person. I mean, I work in an office, I manage a whole bunch of graduate students. I have people that drive me crazy with their need of support or positive praise or whatever. I get that even though that's not my gig, if I don't do it, I'm going to have people who aren't very effective. So I would even say if it's a workplace or a supervision kind of idea, that if they do these things, Bill will be more successful and they will be more successful. So I would just kind of say, but you can't make anybody do it. And my thought is there are certain temperament people that you know, I mean, I'm sure everyone goes, the people that just have to be right, or have to get the last word, or feel like they're giving in if they, you know, don't argue to the like last breath. Those people aren't going to be a good fit for him anyway.
But there is no training techniques for me to use with him on reaction to people.
No, and so what we're doing, at least in our social skills group, is talking about walking away. We're talking about people who are firefighters versus fire starters. This idea that when you pour gas on a fire and then you go, oh, look, it's really hot and everybody's getting burned. They often do that. But they just really can't help themselves. So we talked about some solutions like deep breathing, counting to 10, walking away. So if you could teach him some of those things, it might help. And the deal is he has such a need, like it's so genetically driven to kind of get the last word and to have that last thing. If people always have to engage with him, it's kind of always going to end that way. So if you can teach him some of those things about walking away, that's great. But we've had people who've had job settings where I had a boy who cried on, you know, wherever he was working, he was having a huge fit with his manager, and the manager's like going, yeah, we've got a problem. I mean, you couldn't believe this kind of behavior because this kid had never done this before. But the parents were saying, well, it was like a perfect storm. This happened and that happened. He just couldn't manage. So I think that giving them some strategies like counting to 10, walking away, even if they think they're right, it's okay for them to walk away. So, but it's this idea of saving face, and I think that's hard for them. So if you can train people, especially if they have an ongoing relationship with their kid, to do these things because they work, not because of the right or wrong. Like I don't ever get into that. I just go, you know, you can keep doing that, but it's like beating your head against a wall, and there are people who just will do it over and over, and they just won't learn from that. So I find them no more different than people with Prader-Willi, right, that just won't, I'm going to do it this way, doesn't matter if it's successful. So if you can get them to get that what works and what doesn't work, and for Bill to find a way to save face and walk away from the situation.
Yeah, if I said, hey, just pretend that they're right so that they think they're right, he might buy that.
He might, and you could even say, right, and that's the thing. You don't have to say anything, but if you can kind of do that, and if those kinds of things work for him, then I would definitely try them. And you may have to, it's like anything else, you may try it, and it's like work some of the time, but even some of the time is better than none of the time. What about anyone else?
My daughter won't let me have a timeout.
She won't.
She'll fall like a.
Yeah.
It makes everything worse. Like, and I'll say, Mommy needs a timeout, and I'm trying to go to the bathroom and lock myself in.
Yeah.
And it's just like.
Well, and when they're really engaged, and that's the thing, is she an only child?
No.
Okay.
She's the younger brother.
But she needs very much your attention. So I would literally, if I could, you know, if she's upset, validate her. I know you're very upset. I'm also feeling very upset. I can't keep doing this with you. And again, I mean, I've had kids who've like knocked on the door and just like that's okay. Just let her do it, and she'll be upset, and just say, I need 5 minutes. And give her 5 minutes, like literally look at your watch and go, all right, I got to come out in the real world. And you go out, thank you. And that's what I would go, thank you so much for giving me time. I feel so much better now, even if you don't, just lie. And say, I feel so much better now, and I really genuinely appreciate you giving me that time. And she'll be like, wait, this is so weird. And that'll be great, because you got her a little bit off kilter, and you can kind of go, thank you so much. Can I give you a hug just to whatever she needs? And I mean, my thought is heap on the verbal praise when they do. And it doesn't matter if she's, Mom, the whole time. It doesn't matter. If she's able to do that, then you go, thank you feel so much better. Do that. Don't let her, we have parents who, their kids are 25 and they're still doing that. Your kid's still little.
She's 8.
8. So, but she's still little. So my thought is, and if you can find a way to do it before you get to that kind of like crux. So I tell people, when you see it start to ramp up, do it before it gets too bad, because once they do that, it's like glue. They feel like they're being abandoned, right? I need to talk about this with you, and they'll need to talk about it till the cows come home. So it's okay to say, I can see this headed in a bad direction. And if you don't want to call it timeout, call it something else. Because again, it feels punitive, but if you want to call it cool down, I need a break, whatever. I mean, and when you do that for you, you can also sometimes recommend it when she's getting upset. Oh, gosh, you know how a break makes me feel better? Maybe you should take a break. I'm not saying she will, but it's this idea that you continue to plant that seed and it doesn't feel like you're telling her what to do. Just giving her a suggestion. And then again, thank her profusely for letting you have your 5 minutes in the bathroom. Yeah.
Actually, that really works, that strategy. And I find when I get into difficult situations with the young men that I support,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it's really hard not to react to, and I just have to say to him, I'm going to have to think about that. Just give me a couple of minutes and just a little bit of space,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just leave it till the escalation happens.
Yeah.
And, you both get on to your own, and just even 10, 15, 20 minutes, it's right down, and it's like something has snapped, it's over with.
Yeah.
And it is, I learned that technique of, I need a minute, not you need to calm down, I just need a few minutes, I'm gonna go for 5 minutes.
And the thinking about it's a great idea. So it's not emotional anymore. It's a thinking about it. I need to think about what you've said. And again, the way that you sell it is it's kind of like I tell people,
Bright, cheery.
wow, and again, not upset. And it's hard, I think, for some people to actually fake that. But again, I tell people, it's like a flight attendant. We always say, the plane's going down, things are bad. Like, hi, everybody. So we've got drinks for everybody. It's like all good no matter what's happening. You have to kind of sell that. And if you can do that, they do. They're always a little bit the first few times. I don't know what this is. It feels very uncomfortable. But once it becomes comfortable for them, they're allowing you to do it. And honestly, you can almost never get them to stop when they're escalating without either A, redirecting, changing the person, the situation, the setting. And we tell people that they can't, as long as they're in that setting and that kind of mood, you can't break it. So somebody has to give here. And I've had parents go, well, I've dragged him to timeout. I'm like, oh, well, I'm sure that worked out well. They're dragging him to timeout. And it's like, the kid is like so upset. I'm like, no. It's okay for you to do that. And parents are like, oh, so I think that's great.
Deep with that sing-song voice.
Yes, yeah. I tell people, everything's great no matter what's happening.
Yeah, it does work out.
I'm the mother of the one she supports, but it's, he's in that, he's 23, almost 24, and he's in that, I'm an adult, you can't tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And it's that sales pitch thing that we use all the time with him. It's, well, this is a good idea because, and trying to then make it his idea and have him totally buy in. Because he will stand at the no, you cannot tell me. You can't control my food, you can't control my date, you can't control whatever.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And I tell people, and you have to really believe it. I mean, you have to come up with a, engaging or an argument of some sort. But we had a young man who was part of our social skills group, and he kept coming in late, like 10 minutes late. And it's 30 minutes. So I'd be like, and it was really funny. And I was talking to his mom about it, and she was so frustrated. She said, I don't know what else to do. I mean, I've done this. I've set up the camera. And it was really funny because I know him. I was thinking, what motivates him? Like, I can't make him do it. So I said, Daniel, you keep telling me you want to go to college and you want to be independent and you want to be treated like an adult. I said, it's like anything else, man. I said, if you want to be an adult, act like an adult. I said, what if I showed up 10 minutes late? Would that be okay? Well, no, but that would be horrible. Well, exactly. So I need you to kind of get on board and to do that. And it was so funny. I said, so I want to treat you like an adult, so don't disappoint me. He goes, okay. So he is like, and we laugh because he's on time and he's Elizabeth. And when he's there, I'm like, hey, man, look at you. You're already here. I said, you're so responsible. And he loves it. So I think the sales pitch and coming up with a legitimate reason to do those things is huge.
I mean, sometimes that, at least in the case of my child, and maybe with yours as well, is that they play us sometimes, and we actually don't think they can do whatever they're asking us to do because they've always needed help with it or always manipulated us somehow to be assisting them. The other night, my daughter needed her bedtime routine stuff that I was bound to, or my husband was bound to, or someone was bound to helping her with. And my husband was working late, and I said, I cannot. I have to help your brother tonight with his homework. I cannot help you. You're on your own. And it wasn't sing-songy or kind about it. I was just saying, I cannot. I have nothing left right now.
To do.
I'm in the crisis over here. And then I left her in the shower. And then 15 minutes later, she came out. She's like, can you use my needle? I was like, you're wearing your pajamas, your teeth are brushed, you've set up your bed, you've got it. And she's like, yeah. It's like, do you know I've been doing that? I'm helping you and all this. What the hell?
Yeah.
But I didn't say that to her. I was like, wow, that's really good.
Right.
And then was all lovey and then put her to bed, went and did that last needle part and came back. I was like, she can do all that. And
Yeah.
my son was like, yeah, wow. So now she's doing all that.
And the sing-songy voice only works well for certain people. Like I tell people, I'm generally not that, but I'm also very like direct, and so it works well for me. It has to be genuine. If you're not like if that's not who you are, I always tell people, then don't be something you're not. They have a bigger issue when you're not credible. Like people who try really hard to be, teachers will go, oh, I try so hard to blah, blah, blah. And I go, man, everything about you tells me you're one pissed off teacher. And I get that. But the idea that you're going to somehow sell this idea that everything's great, you can't do that. And I generally don't. I just come in with this kind of perplexed look like, Like I just, and if I come up with the solution, it's one that I've already figured out what the solution is going to be. So my job is to always act like I just pull it right out of my head. It's completely not something I've thought of. And they'll go, but what do you think? Do you think that's something we can agree on? And it's like that, even something we can agree on, they're like, agree on. It's like they kind of like think about what that means. And I do think so many parents do things for their kids because, again, they used to not be able to do it. I had a mom who was, God love her, she has twins with PWS. She was brushing their teeth and combing their hair and doing all these other kinds of things. And I said, but they're capable. Well, they don't do a good job. I have a son who looks homeless. It's fine. It's not about what this whole idea that somehow, that's a reflection of you. So I think it's this idea that we let them do that. And honestly, giving them praise. And I always tell people, when you go to middle school, high school, there are all these like natural transitions. I go, that's the time you start going, wow, you're almost grown. So this is the time that I'm, people your age, and I'm trying to say kids, teenagers your age do these things. That's a great time to get them to do more things independently, to actually kind of take more control. And honestly, most kids with PWS love when they do something by themselves and people go, oh my God, I can't believe I've been treating you like a baby. You're a big teenager and I should have to be put on your pajamas. So from now on, this is great. We'll have the snuggle time, we'll have the whatever. We won't have to do all the other stuff. And I think that's huge because honestly, when people talk about drugs that may help for hyperphagia. There's a couple trials that'll probably be starting later this year that will help for that. I tell people, so your kid's no longer hungry or they're not, their food things are managed. How independent are they? Because for a lot of people, it's like, I'm dressing my kid, I'm doing all these things for my kid, and it's like they're not even close to being independent. And there are people who are able to do that. So the best thing you can do if these trials actually do work and these drugs do work is to get your kid as independent and have as many kind of self-skills as they can possibly have, because that's the best way for them to live independently. And I do have people whose 10 or 12-year-old is unloading the dish, like they're doing things around the house. Don't act like your kid's an invalid. They can do those things, and it's really good for their kind of feeling of self-confidence and self-help. So don't do it for them. Let them do it for themselves, and even if they're not great at it, it's important for them to have those skills.
Can you talk a little bit about how to manage the well, in my situation, my daughter really mixes up things that happened in the past, really in the past, with things that are in her complete imagination. She has a very active, like she's got an imaginary friend, that sort of thing, with stuff that actually happened and actual worries. And I really have a hard time discerning when she's telling
the truth,
the reality, and when it's her own reality, and when it's just rehashing something from way back, like she talks about a kid who bullied her. She's in grade 4 now. This happened in grade 1, or, and it's like, and she'll use that as an excuse anytime she's upset. Well, Ashton bullied me, and I'm like, that was 4 years ago, and I don't know. I don't know when she's. I know she's upset about something, but she's kind of like crying wolf a lot of the time, and I don't know what to do sometimes.
Which makes it really tough. So I would just say, is Ashton bullying you right now? Which of course she's going to go, well, no, not really. okay, so that's something that happened in the past, and so we can learn from that. And I tell people that's when you kind of go, so what did we do that worked in that situation? And then I would even say, is there something that's happening now? And again, that whole reality, like I watched it in a movie, so it happened to me. I'm like, no, that's not how that works. This idea that they often get that stuff mixed up. I would just say focus on the here and now and to do those kinds of things so that she actually has this idea of, well, that's not happening right now. What is happening right now? And it may be that she can't really, actually say it. And that's a possibility. So I would say, ask other people like what they think. Is there something going on at school? That kind of stuff. But also realizing that even when she does that, it's not the end of the world. People get upset. Don't you get upset about something that happened to you? My boss was mean to me 5 years ago, and my boss is now mean to me, so therefore we do that. It's okay. That's her way of kind of saying, the reason I'm upset is because these other things happen, and they will often dredge up something that happened 10 years ago. That's okay, but I tell people that shouldn't, and it's not an excuse, so validate the feelings, not the behavior. I see you're upset about that, and talk about those things, and then say, is there something that's going on now that I can help you with? It's all about problem solving, validate the feelings, and then go, what can we do to make this better? If you can do that, sometimes you can get them to focus on not wallowing and, kind of regurgitating all that emotional stuff, because it's really tough for them to move on.